Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. The Taliban, an Islamist militant group that emerged in the mid-1990s, has profoundly shaped the political, cultural and social dynamics of Afghanistan. Its roots lie in a combination of historical legacies, geopolitical machinations, and ideological factors, with its influence extending beyond Afghanistan's borders. Initially formed to restore order and implement a strict interpretation of Islamic law, the Taliban evolved into a significant political and military force, resilient in the face of international interventions and domestic challenges. This video explores the origins of the Taliban and their initial rise to power, their development after being ousted in 2001, and their eventual return to power in 2021, demonstrating their enduring role in Afghanistan's history. Understanding the Taliban's emergence requires examining Afghanistan's turbulent history. As a landlocked nation at the crossroads of Central and South Asia, Afghanistan has long been a battleground for imperial powers. The 19th century Great Game between Britain and Russia saw Afghanistan used as a buffer state, entrenching tribal divisions and fostering a legacy of resistance to external interference. By the 20th century, Afghanistan's attempts to modernize were marked by conflict between reformist and traditionalist forces. In 1973, King Zahir Shah was deposed by Mohammed Daoud Khan, who established the Republic of Afghanistan. However, Daoud's modernization efforts and increasing authoritarianism alienated key segments of the population. In 1978, the Communist People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan overthrew Daoud in a coup, initiating sweeping reforms that provoked widespread resistance. This opposition culminated in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, aimed at stabilizing the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan's regime. The Soviet-Afghan War, which lasted from 1979 to 1989, devastated Afghanistan, with millions displaced and entire regions left in ruins. Afghan mujahideen fighters, supported by the United States, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, resisted Soviet forces. Pakistan's inter-services intelligence played a pivotal role in training and arming these fighters, fostering a culture of jihad and laying the groundwork for the Taliban's emergence. The war ended with Soviet withdrawal in 1989, leaving a fractured country and a power vacuum that fueled a brutal civil war among the Mujahideen factions. The Taliban emerged in the early 1990s during the chaotic period following the collapse of Afghanistan's communist regime in 1992. The term Taliban derives from the Pashto word for students, reflecting the group's origins in Islamic seminaries, madrassas, in Pakistan. Many of these madrassas were funded by Saudi Arabia and adhered to the Deobandi tradition of Sunni Islam, which emphasized puritanical interpretations of Islamic law and rejection of Western influences. The Taliban's core leadership comprised individuals who had been shaped by the Afghan-Soviet war, either as combatants or as displaced individuals. These young men, many of whom were orphans or refugees, were radicalized in the madrassas along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Their ideology blended Deobandi Islam with elements of Pashtun tribal codes, creating a unique socio-religious framework. The Taliban's initial rise was fueled by a promise to restore stability and enforce Sharia law, appealing to a war-weary population disillusioned by the infighting among Mujahideen factions. In 1994, the group's military capabilities became apparent when they seized Kandahar, a strategically significant and predominantly Pashtun region in southern Afghanistan. From there, the Taliban rapidly expanded their territorial control, often facing little resistance as they capitalized on local support and Pakistan's backing. By 1996, they had captured Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Once in power, the Taliban implemented a strict interpretation of Sharia law, leading to draconian social policies. Women were barred from education and employment, required to wear the burqa, and excluded from public life. Cultural and recreational activities including music, cinema, and sports were banned, and punishments such as public executions and amputations became common. The Taliban's cultural policies attracted international condemnation, most notably their destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan in 2001. These ancient statues, significant symbols of Afghanistan's diverse heritage, were demolished as part of the Taliban's campaign against idolatry. This act underscored their rigid ideological stance and further isolated them on the global stage. The Taliban also forged alliances with transnational terrorist organizations, most notably Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden and his network used Afghanistan as a base of operations, with the Taliban providing sanctuary in exchange for financial and military support. This relationship culminated in the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States, allegedly orchestrated by Al-Qaeda. The Taliban's refusal to hand over bin Laden prompted the US-led invasion of Afghanistan, marking the end of their rule. Following the 9/11 attacks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom, a military campaign to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. By December of 2001, the Taliban regime had been ousted, and a new Afghan government was established under Hamid Karzai. Despite their rapid defeat, the Taliban were not eradicated. Instead, they retreated to rural areas and across the border into Pakistan. The post-2001 period saw the Taliban transform into a resilient insurgent movement. Several factors facilitated their resurgence. Firstly, the new Afghan government struggled with corruption, inefficiency, and an inability to extend its authority beyond urban centres. Secondly, the US-led coalition military campaigns often caused civilian casualties, alienating the population and providing propaganda material for the Taliban. Finally, Pakistan's dual role, nominally an ally of the US, but covertly supportive of the Taliban, enabled the Taliban to regroup and rebuild. The Taliban adapted their tactics to wage asymmetrical warfare, including suicide bombings, improvised explosive devices, and targeted assassinations. They also framed their insurgency as a struggle for Afghan sovereignty against foreign occupation, resonating with nationalist sentiments. By the mid-2010s, the Taliban controlled significant swaths of rural territory, challenging the Afghan government's authority and undermining efforts to stabilize the country. The Taliban's internal structure underwent notable changes during their years as an insurgent group. The death of their founder, Mullah Mohammad Omar, in 2013 created a leadership crisis, but the group maintained cohesion under Mullah Akhtar Mansour and later Hibatullah Akhundzada. These leaders combined hardline ideology with pragmatic strategies, including outreach to international actors. In the late 2010s, the Taliban engaged in direct negotiations with the United States, facilitated by Qatar. These talks culminated in the 2020 Doha Agreement, which outlined a framework for the withdrawal of US forces in exchange for Taliban commitments to counter-terrorism and engage in intra-Afghan dialogue. While the agreement marked a significant shift in the Taliban's diplomatic approach, it didn't resolve the underlying conflict. In August of 2021, following the withdrawal of US and NATO forces, the Taliban launched a rapid military offensive that culminated in the capture of Kabul. The Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, plagued by corruption and low morale, collapsed with little resistance. The Taliban's return to power marked the restoration of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, nearly 2 decades after their initial ousting. The Taliban's return was characterized by mixed messaging. While they pledged to implement a more moderate form of governance compared to the 1990s, reports indicated that they returned to repressive practices. Women's rights and freedoms were once again curtailed, with restrictions on education and employment. The Taliban's governance also faced significant challenges, including economic collapse, humanitarian crises, and a lack of international recognition. Despite these challenges, the Taliban have sought to portray themselves as a legitimate political entity, emphasizing national sovereignty and regional cooperation. Their relationship with transnational jihadist groups, however, remains a point of contention, complicating their efforts to gain international acceptance. The Taliban's origins and evolution reflect the interplay of historical, ideological, and geopolitical forces that have shaped Afghanistan's trajectory. From their emergence as a movement promising stability, to their transformation into a global insurgent force and eventual return to power, the Taliban have demonstrated adaptability and resilience. However, their rigid ideological foundations and repressive policies continue to generate challenges both for Afghanistan and the international community. Addressing these challenges requires a nuanced understanding of the Taliban's history and the complex dynamics of Afghan society. As Afghanistan grapples with an uncertain future, the Taliban's role remains both pivotal and deeply contentious. This interplay of ideology, geopolitics, and resilience underscores how movements like the Taliban emerge, persist, and reshape themselves to survive changing dynamics. The group's evolution from a localized force to a globally recognized player highlights the complexities inherent in addressing both their existence and the conditions that sustain them. Over the years, the Taliban, of course, have been known to commit horrific acts of violence on political dissidents and others they deem as undesirable or lawbreakers. While they don't have the same reputation as other terror groups, such as ISIS, when it comes to filming their atrocities, they still do have a sizable collection of disturbing and horrific videos taken over the years. Today, we will explore some of said clips. But nevertheless, let's get into the videos in question. The first video details the stoning of a young woman. The backstory is murky behind this clip. Some sources state that the murder was carried out by the Taliban, while others state that the murder was carried out by a pro-government militia led by a man named Saidi Yar. According to the Taliban, the incident took place in 2015, and they themselves point the finger at Saidi Yar. The clip went viral in 2020, and it was attributed to the Taliban, though in reality the clip was actually released in 2015. Most mainstream sources place blame on the Taliban for the murder, though there does seem to be some discrepancies with this case. It is possible that the Taliban were not responsible, and that a separate militia were the perpetrators. The stoning took place in the village of Galmin, on the outskirts of Firozkoh. A local official named Mohammed Zaman Azimi, who blamed the Taliban for the incident, claimed that the victim was a 19-year-old woman, simply known as Roxana, and she was stoned to death due to allegedly having premarital sex with her fiancé, a 23-year-old man named Mohammed Gul, who was reportedly also lashed. The couple allegedly had fled their families in a bid to find a place to be married, though they were seemingly caught either by a separate militia or the Taliban themselves. The video itself is just shy of 4 minutes, at 3 minutes and 57 seconds in length. The video is shot in a mountainous desert region during the daytime. As you play the clip, you see a large crowd of men surrounding the victim, who is sitting in a freshly dug hole. 2 men, one of which has an AK-47 on his back, can be seen placing what looks like a blanket over the victim. The crowd is loud, baying for blood, launching scathing tirades at the victim. The 2 men then back off, and the crowd immediately move in, essentially circling the victim. They then proceed to pelt stones at her, starting off with smaller rocks. They bounce off the victim as they hit, and her screams are horrific. Men can be heard shouting in the crowd, "Hit her! Hit her in the head!" In the space of about a minute, it's not exaggerating to say that the poor girl has been hit by at least 100 stones, and she is still alive, sitting up in the hole. You hear her sobbing as she continues to be pelted. At about 1.5 minutes of continuous stoning, the rocks are getting larger, and eventually the poor woman collapses into the grave, either knocked out or dead. The men still continue with the stoning. They just keep going. Eventually, so many stones have been thrown at the victim that the grave has been partially filled, essentially burying the woman under the stones. Her head, under the cloth, is still poking out from the rocks. A member of the crowd then moves in and looks under the cloth to check on the state of the victim. The crowd then resume throwing more stones at her head, before the stoning then slows down as the crowd begins to disperse. What surprises me about these stoning videos is just how long the victims can remain conscious. It truly is, in my opinion, one of the worst ways to die that I've covered. It sends shivers down the spine, and the screams and crying of Roxana are utterly depressing and unnerving. The next clip is arguably the most well-known execution recorded by the Taliban due to one specific reason: the age of the actual executioner. The video was released in the year of 2007 and drew international condemnation. To be precise, the video was recorded in Pakistan, perpetrated by the Pakistani Taliban. The victim in the video is accused of being a spy on the payroll of US authorities. Some reports indicate that his name was Ghulam Nabi, not to be confused with the Indian politician of the same name. Following the release of the video, Taliban commander Mullah Mohammad Khan, while speaking to Reuters, said that the Taliban would kill anyone helping foreign forces in order to protect their guerrilla fighters. "We showed the beheading video to warn others," claimed Mullah. Asked why the Taliban used a boy, he said the following: "We want to show our adversaries that our youngsters are also mujahideens and fight with us against you. These youngsters will be our holy war commanders in the future and continue the jihad for freedom." Islam allows boys and women to do jihad against occupying non-Muslim troops and their spies as well as puppets. The victim, Ghulam Nabi, was a Pakistani militant accused of betraying Mullah Akhtar Usmani, a Taliban commander killed by a NATO airstrike in December of 2006. Nabi's father, Ghulam Saki, confirmed that his son was a committed Taliban fighter who had fought in Afghanistan and sheltered insurgent leaders inside their mud-walled home, about a 2-hour drive from the border. The grieving 70-year-old refused to watch the execution video, but vowed to avenge his death. He stated to the Associated Press, "The Taliban are not mujahideen. They are not fighting for the cause of Islam. If I got my hands on them, I would kill them and tear their flesh with my own teeth." Various human rights groups commented on the atrocious video, with UNICEF stating that the use of children under the age of 15 years old during a conflict is a war crime under international law. The video itself is 3 minutes and 11 seconds in length. The clip has been shot during daytime in what looks to be a rural village. In front of the camera stands the 12-year-old, soon-to-be killer. He looks directly into the camera and makes an address. He does his best to sound threatening, but his squeaky child voice, which hasn't dropped, adds a dynamic that makes the address incredibly unnerving. He accuses the victim Ghulam of being a traitor, a collaborator, and a spy on behalf of US agencies. The boy is wearing a white headband with an oversized combat jacket. He's also carrying a razor-sharp combat knife. The address lasts around 10 seconds, and the video then jump cuts. You then see the victim laying on the ground on his side. He is being held down by a Taliban fighter, as well as several other children. The 12-year-old executioner can be seen standing over the captive, knife in hand, waiting for the go-ahead to conduct the execution. Eventually, he gets the nod. The boy then kneels down over the victim and places his palm on the captive's head. In the other hand is the knife, which is huge. He rests the sharp edge of the blade against the man's throat, before he then begins slicing back and forth. Blood spurts out immediately. The blade is razor sharp, and in a couple of seconds, it has cut through the carotid arteries and the windpipe. You see the hole where the windpipe has been cut, and blood is being sucked into it as the victim still tries to breathe. The male Taliban fighter pulls the victim's head back, making the gash in his throat open up. At this point, the child executioner uses the knife and begins hacking through the spinal cord. After each hit, the victim body jolts, but the other children who are holding the captive in place don't even flinch. The person filming then zooms in further, and it looks as if you see the bottom of the victim's tongue due to how close the cut was made under the chin. Due to the executioner being a child and his lack of strength, it takes him a long time to actually cut through the spine. He just hacks away, though eventually he cuts through the spine. He then cuts the rest of the flesh at the back of the neck before finally completing the beheading. The child then holds the head up to the camera, and due to his small stature, it looks even more disturbing. The kids around him laugh and chant, and the adult fighters seem to congratulate the boy. The child then places the severed head on the torso, before the clip concludes. The video itself is very bloody, and considering the year it was filmed, the quality is actually fairly good, though the sounds of the clip have largely been drowned out due to a Taliban music track that was dubbed over it. Despite the blood and the prolonged nature of the beheading, the most unsettling aspect of it is obvious, quite frankly. Seeing such a young boy commit an act like that without hesitation is incredibly depressing. Looking at his face when he makes the address is honestly haunting. His face still conveys that naive childhood innocence, but that is juxtaposed with the horrific act that he commits. It's one of those videos that I find it hard to get my head around. But anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it, if you can enjoy this sort of content. Of course, I'd like to wish you guys a happy new year. Heading into the 4th year of doing this channel. We started in May of 21, it's now 2025. So yeah, when we get to May, it's 4 years doing the channel, and once we hit that milestone, we will see what the future holds, I'd say. But I would like to thank you for the support, the unwavering support that you have shown this channel and me over the last few years. If you're interested in my other socials, link to my Twitter is in the pinned comment, as is a link to my boxing channel and a link to my Twitch channel, so check those out if you're interested. But anyway, as always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.